Avatar is better than Avatar The Way of Water. Let me explain. But before I do, I should probably mention two brief but important disclaimers. Firstly, at the time of this video's release, The Way of Water will still be out in theaters, so I don't exactly have a lot of footage to work with, so bear with me when I either show the same Avatar 2 clip over and over again or use visuals, sorry. The movie's not out on home or digital yet, so what can I do? Secondly, the topics of CG, high frame rate, or anything relating to visual or special effects will not be discussed in this video essay because 1, they're not really relevant to my argument as to why I enjoyed Avatar more than its sequel, and 2, even if they were, there isn't really anything new or unique I can say about them that hasn't already been said. Yes, the visual and special effects are not just better than the first, but they're probably the best I've seen in any major blockbuster in the past decade, let alone this year. However, while all of this is fact, visual effects for me only go so far because it doesn't really matter how cum-splurging your film looks. If it doesn't have characters or stories that grip me, then the CG will only go so far. And while yes, the story of these movies aren't exactly the thing that people remember when it comes to the Avatar franchise, they are still essential parts of their respective films. Granted, a lot of the story elements in both the first and second Avatar are pretty formulaic and by the numbers, and something that we've seen a billion times before, but in my opinion, what's important isn't necessarily the story itself, but how the story is told. You could have the most basic story ever, but if it's told in an effective and powerful way that will leave your audience's pants stained with cum and wanting more, then it doesn't really matter how original your story is. What matters is that it's something viewers will take away, and this is precisely why I enjoyed the original more than the sequel. The world building, the characters, the emotional weight, these are things that helped me fall in love with Avatar that are simply lacking in Way of Water, and while I'm definitely in the minority with this opinion, I want to at least explain why I feel this way using 3 important points. Point number 1, world building. So world building and creating consistent lore it's suitable for a universe as massive as Avatar, or just any sci-fi or fantasy story in general, is a pretty tall order, and something that very few are able to successfully pull off, and thankfully James Cameron is one of those individuals. However, while Cameron does a great job of creating a consistent fictional world within the Avatar franchise that is interesting enough to warrant like 600 more sequels, the way that he expands upon his fictional universe and explores the unique aquatic biology and environment in Way of Water just felt like a major step down compared to how world building was approached in the previous Avatar. It's kind of hard to put exactly how I feel in words, so let me explain it in this way. Think of the Avatar series' approach to world building as a subject in biology that you would want to learn more about, and Avatar and Avatar Way of the Water give you 2 ways to learn about that topic. Avatar 1's approach to world building feels like watching a BBC Planet Earth nature documentary where, through lots of detailed footage and commentary, you witness the biology topic unfold in front of you. Avatar The Way of Water's approach to world building feels like sitting in a classroom and listening to a college professor lecture through a PowerPoint about that very same biological topic. On paper, there's nothing wrong with either approach to learning, and you technically get the same amount of information from both settings, but for me, personally, I much favor Avatar's approach to world building than its sequel's approach. And the reason why I feel this way, or why I made this comparison in the first place, is because Avatar's method of world building feels just so much more immersive and engaging than its sequel. You see, part of what made the world building so much more immersive and interesting in the first Avatar is that it didn't feel like an exposition dump, it felt like you were actually seeing and learning more and more about the world as the film goes on, and a big part of that is with the character of Jake Sully. Now, I'm not going to pretend that Jake Sully is this monumental character that deserves to go in the Hall of Fame of dankest film characters or some shit like that, because he really isn't that, but the reason why he was such an effective main character in the original Avatar is because he was more or less a stand-in for the audience. Jake doesn't know about the world of Pandora any more than we do, and so as he starts interacting more and more with the creatures and organisms of this world, we start learning more as well. And this is where Cameron sort of gets to have his cake and eat it too, because while there are a lot of moments where characters tell you about all the bullshit that happens in Pandora and how it all works, it never feels like exposition because 1, the world building intertwines with what's happening in the plot, and 2, the information that is being dumped is essential for Jake's growth as a character because as he learns more about Pandora, the easier time he can survive. One of the prime examples of what I'm talking about occurs during the scene where Jake and pals stumble upon a pack of fucking alien rhinos after fumbling around with his shrooms. Jake attempts to shoot the shit out of the rhinos, but Ripley stops him and explains why attacking them is a bad idea, stating that the armor is super thick and that they're territorial animals. None of this feels like exposition because it's crucial information that both helps build the world of Pandora and the threats that inhabit it, while also building tension between Jake and the alien rhinos. However, I think the best example of this is definitely during the second act of the film, where Jake becomes a part of the people and is taught in the ways of the Na'vi by Neytiri. Through both narration and lots of gorgeous visuals, we are shown just how these blue Native Americans operate, how they ride horses, how they hunt with a bow and arrow, how they ride these sick fucking alien dragons, the bond that's shared through their freaky hair, etc. In many ways, this is an even better example than the alien rhino thing I mentioned earlier, because this is where we get a deep dive into the Na'vi's culture and where the actual lore is being properly developed. See, prior to this moment, we are told what the Na'vi are and why they're a threat to humans, but we never know exactly who they are and why they choose to act the way they do. And it's during the second act we not only learn so much about just who these people are, but also why these people are. This is especially the case of Neytiri, who in my opinion is the best character in the entire film. When we're first introduced to her, she starts out as a simple, strong female badass that is pretty much a staple in every James Cameron film. But as she teaches Jake the ways of the Na'vi, we learn more about who she is, what she values in life, what her people mean to her, and ultimately why she ends up falling in love with Jake. And in a way, you can also witness Jake's character being developed as well, because as he starts learning more and more and starts becoming more in tune with the biology and nature of Pandora, the more he grows and becomes a different person, both literally and metaphorically. The ultimate culmination of this comes when he has to engage with and bond with Nikran, the alien dragon things I mentioned earlier, because it's a culmination of everything that Jake has learned up to at that single point. He has officially become a part of the people. And the best part about all of this is that not once during Neytiri's lessons or misadventures with Jake and Fern Gully do any of these moments come off as an exposition dump, because not only what is being communicated essential and told in a way that feels incredibly natural and unforced, but it also helps the audience feel the intended emotions that come in the third act of the film, which I'll get into later. This is what I mean when I mentioned earlier that the first Avatar feels like I'm watching a BBC Planet Earth nature documentary. It doesn't feel like someone's just lecturing me for 3 hours, it feels like I'm actually there with the animals and plants and aliens and other critters running around. It feels incredibly immersive because we learn all the shit that's happening along with Jake, so we're able to retain all the information that Cameron wants us to keep, and it's this very approach that's just almost virtually gone in Way of Water. Now, technically, this approach of world and lore building in the first Avatar is in this sequel as well. Like with the first Avatar, Jake and company transport to a new world that's completely foreign to them, and through lots of pretty visuals and character interaction, we witness the characters learning how to survive and even thrive in this new water environment. There's even a scene that mirrors the first film where the chief of the Southern Water Tribe tells his people to treat Jake and his posse like they're babies or little children who can't survive without their help and so need to be taught in their ways in order to become functioning members of their tribe. On paper, this is technically the same, but it doesn't feel the same because not only am I not able to retain the same amount of information, but it also just doesn't even feel like I'm learning as much as I did in the first film. You see, the main reason why I'm just not digging the world building in the sequel as much as I did in the first film is because, one, the actual pacing in terms of world building and communicating these important points about Pandora is just way too fast to the point that I don't really feel like I'm retaining anything. Two, there is very little that I'm being taught just in general because a lot of these exposition scenes are just an excuse to show off the cool water visuals instead of actually giving us more insight into the lore. And three, there's no stand-in characters or reference points that we can learn alongside. It's crazy that despite this film being 30 minutes longer than its predecessor, I learned much less shit than I did in the first film because this attempt at world building is just so much weaker than the original. The film throws so many concepts and ideas like these fucking water dinosaur things and these winged alien alligator things, which I would assume are these people's versions of the horses and the flying dragons from the first Avatar, but the film just kind of glosses over these important details like what roles do they serve in this people's community, what sort of bonds are created when they ride these creatures, etc., for more screen time of 14-year-old Sigourney Weaver digging around in the water, which again, I wouldn't mind if it just added to anything, if it meant something in the grand scheme of things, whether they be character development or world building, but it just doesn't accomplish either. Like with the other attempts at world building, all the opportunities at building Kitty's character and how she ultimately is sort of this powerful spiritual being is moved aside for more water shit, and it's really infuriating. And keep in mind, because I'm gonna harp on Cameron's obsession with getting wet a little while longer, but I don't have any issues with these long-ass scenes where the characters essentially do free diving and explore all the coral and sea creatures lurking around under the sea. In fact, if anything, I would say these striking and gorgeous-looking water shots are probably the best parts in the entire movie. But my issue is that whenever the first Avatar did something like this, it's always intertwined with the film's story and helped move things along. But in this sequel, it always felt like the story and the world building were two separate things where one just stops and the other thing starts. And if that's something you enjoy, then good on you, but for me, whenever I see a big sci-fi epic with a massive runtime like this, I want things to be on the move, and so whenever the film just screeches to a halt for more of this water shit, and it doesn't really add to the world building or story beyond just on a surface level, then I'm gonna be frustrated. And an important thing to note is that I don't care about these things because I'm like deeply invested invested in this universe, I care about these things because they are vital in learning more about the people that the main characters are interacting with and ultimately develop some kind of emotional attachment to them once the third act happens. Again, I'm gonna go more in depth about all this shit pertaining to all this third act stuff later, but the point is that in the first Avatar, learning about everything that we did in such great detail made me care not just about Neytiri, but Neytiri's people and what defines them. It's why I cared when Neytiri's dad dies, even though I didn't learn like a single thing about him. But in Way of Water, I don't know jack shit about any of these fucking water nymphs because the film doesn't tell me anything about them other than that they use these water dinosaurs and flying alligators to travel through water. Like, that's about it. Wow, real helpful there, movie. Thanks for that. The closest thing we get to learning more about the people taking care of and teaching Jake and his family is during the scene where Kate Winslet's character uses some weird alien magic shit to help bring Kitty out of her coma. And it's a pretty interesting scene, but instead of leaning into that and learning more about the spiritual nature of this water tribe and how it may be different from the spirituality of the forest tribe, it once again moves past this for more scenes of Jake Jr. dicking around in the water with a whale. And speaking of Jake Jr., he symbolizes what I mentioned before about how there is no stand-in character for the audience to relate to or place themselves in, and while technically there's nothing wrong with that on paper, it makes the retaining of world building really fucking difficult when we don't have a stand-in character to help us learn all this stuff. As I mentioned before, The Way of Water essentially does the same thing as the first film, where the characters are thrust into a completely new and foreign environment, and so they have to essentially learn from the ground up to thrive. And even Jake Jr., he essentially has the same personality, the same rebelliousness that his father had in the first film. But unlike in that first movie where we learn everything about Pandora step by step with Jake, we don't have that same kind of experience here because, as I mentioned before, the pacing of these world building moments are just so fucking fast that we barely have time to breathe. There are very few moments where the characters struggle to truly earn the ability to thrive in this new environment because, despite what the movie tells me, it seems like the characters are easily able to just pick this shit up like it's nothing, as if it was riding a bike for the first time in 10 years. Avatar 1, you can see several times throughout the film that Jake struggles with a lot of these foreign concepts and he doesn't pick it up right away, but as the movie goes on, you can see that he's slowly learning and slowly becoming more and more Na'vi, and you can see just how far he's come by passing the final test of taming an Ikran, something that Neytiri told Jake that he can't do until he's ready. There isn't a single moment like that in Way of Water because, again, despite what Cameron is telling me, it doesn't seem like the characters are struggling. It seems at best like a minor inconvenience before they can easily breathe underwater, ride these fucking water dinosaurs, and do some free diving hunting, and seeing them succeed so easily in this new environment is just so unsatisfying. The movie straight up tells me that learning the ways of the water Na'vi will be a difficult challenge, only for the film to show me otherwise as they fucking get all this shit easily in like less than half an hour. Hell, fucking Jake is able to ride one of these flying alligator things after messing up like one time. It's such bullshit. Now, after hearing me say all this shit, you're probably thinking, well, actually, you know, they made it clear in the film that Jake and his kids are not 100% Na'vi, as they mentioned before that they have, quote, demon fingers, indicating that there's human DNA found in these kids. And sure, let's say that you're correct and that this is Cameron's justification for why Jake and his kids are so fucking good at everything. But even if that were the case, it, one, still doesn't really excuse a lot of the issues I mentioned earlier because we still don't have a lot of emotional attachment when it comes to all this rapid quick-fire world building, and two, you can still fix this problem by doing one very simple thing, and that's making Neytiri the main character instead of Loak. Now, I understand why Cameron decided to focus on this guy instead of Jake and Neytiri, as Jim is clearly more interested in the kids than the parents. But the point I want to make is that Neytiri is not only the only one of the family who doesn't have human DNA, but she is also the one who arguably would be the least susceptible to adaptability. Not only did she grow up in the forest her whole life, but it's that environment where she learned everything she needed to know to survive. And like the phrase goes, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. It would be reasonable to assume that she would have a harder time adapting to this new environment than her kids or even her husband would. So in that sense, you could have had Neytiri be the stand-in character this time around, have her kind of go through a similar struggle that Jake went through in the first Avatar film. It's just this one simple solution that could just fix so many issues I have with this second act. It would allow Cameron to make his cake and eat it too, because he could accomplish everything that I think he was trying to achieve. He could help drive character growth / development, expand upon this new environment in Pandora, and still show off those cool dank-ass water visuals that he so desperately wants to show off. This could could all be easily fixed if you just swapped Jake Jr. with Mrs. Sully, or even if you just gave more obstacles for Loak to overcome if Cameron was so insistent on making this kid the main character. Literally just do fucking something, because I just didn't think it was as effective as it could have been. This is what I meant when I said the attempt at world building in this second film felt more like a biology professor's lecture instead of a nature documentary. Technically, I'm learning the same amount, but I'm basically being told all the vital information instead of being shown it, and while you can argue all the free diving water shit is technically that, I personally just need a lot more. Point number 2, character motivation. Okay, let's just get this out of the way because everyone is thinking the exact same thing when I mention character development, so let's not beat around the bush. Spider makes no fucking sense. So basically, for anyone who's confused, Spider is actually the son of Colonel Miles Quaritch, the main bad guy in both the original and the sequel, and he's basically a human who was abandoned on Pandora because he was too young for cryosleep, so he's basically grown up and been adopted by Jake and company as if he was a Na'vi like everyone else. And while in premise this would make for a unique and interesting character, the way that Cameron and the writers of Jurassic World and Mulan 2020 went about developing this character is just so fucking weird, as his motivations and his decisions behind a lot of his actions just make no goddamn sense. So in the movie, Spider is captured by Miles and his gang of humans doing blueface after a failed sneak attack on Jake and his family, and he's tortured by Carmela Soprano into revealing information about where Jake Sully and his gang is holding up. And when it's revealed that he refuses to give them a location, Quaritch instead do some other bullshit plan, which frankly doesn't make a whole lot of sense if I'm being honest. Basically, Quaritch tries to butter up Spider by saying he admires his loyalty and that he's a good soldier or fucking whatever in an attempt to coax him to willingly work with him, and this somehow works because this for some reason fucking motivates Spider to want to team up with his blue-faced sort of dad to track down Jake and his family. I'm sorry, what? How does this make any sense? And look, even if Quaritch's 4D chess multi-layered gamer brain plan somehow made the least bit of sense, it still doesn't make any sense as to why Spider would even do any of this shit in the first place, much less give Quaritch anything remotely useful to help him track down Jake Sully and their family. Because Spider was basically an adopted member of Jake's family, and while sure Neytiri was racist against Spider for being white, he was still generally accepted as a member of the family, as Jake and his kids loved having him around. And therefore, Spider loved Jake and pals back, and to show his love for Jake and his family, Spider teaches Quaritch how to speak the Na'vi language, how to bond with and ride a dragon, rides along with Quaritch in his murder quest and hunting down the people who raised him as he burns down innocent water tribe villages and kills Moby Dick. Wow, such a generous fucking way to express your love towards a group of people who raised you. Thanks, asshole. Now, I would be a little more amenable to Spider's distorted sense of loyalty if the movie even somewhat explains why the fuck he is so chummy with his sort of dad and doing all this bullshit. Like, if him and Spider had a couple of bonding moments where they could get closer as father and son, that I'd sort of understand, and Quaritch is an even more interesting character than he was in the first film because he has these conflicting moments where he has to choose between getting his revenge against Jake or saving his son near the end of the film. But this movie barely shows any scenes beyond that particular moment that I talked about. There are very few scenes or moments or fucking anything to potentially flesh out this relationship and thereby justify all of Spider's bizarre moments. And what really pisses me off is that throughout the film, Quaritch and the Australians do a bunch of cruel, fucked up shit like burning down innocent villages and hunting Moby Dick, and Spider just stands there watching all this shit, and he's clearly traumatized and disgusted by what he's witnessing. He clearly doesn't approve of any of this bullshit, and yet in spite of that, he still not only willingly continues to follow Quaritch around, but actually fucking save him at the end of the movie? What? So yeah, if you couldn't figure it out, Spider's character is just the biggest insult to my intelligence because his motivation is about as flimsy as an incel's penis, and the worst part is that the guy who plays him is a decent actor who gave a decent performance. I just wished his performance wasn't associated with such a messy-ass character, and it really sticks out when everyone else's motivations are pretty clear, and while this seems like a minor issue to pick on, considering that Spider plays such a major role in the film and how he's the reason Quaritch is able to track down Jake and his family, it was literally getting in the way of my enjoyment of the film. Say what you will about the first Avatar, but everyone's motivation was incredibly fucking clear. The tree-hugging hippies love science and blue people, and the evil dickhead military people love guns and burning blue people. Jake Sully was originally part of Team Military, but then after having some of that sweet blue alien pussy, I mean blue sea, he not only switched teams, but switched races as well. Is it the most obvious black and white, generic, by-the-numbers motivation these characters could have in a movie like this? Absolutely. But it's still incredibly effective in establishing who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, and what their goals and motivations are throughout the story. As I previously mentioned, it doesn't really matter how played out something is as long as it's effectively used in the story. And while you can talk shit all you want about how cliched the story is, at least it's effectively establishing everyone's motivation. Point number 3, emotional weight and attachment. In both Avatar and Avatar Way of Water, they play this iconic piece of music from the original film. Whenever this piece of music from the soundtrack is played, it's always accompanied by the lowest point of the film. So in the original Avatar, this piece of music is played when Korich and his frat blow the shit out of the home tree, and through Jake and Neytiri's perspective, we witness their home being burned to the ground, their loved ones either dying in their arms or killed from the wreckage of the tree blowing up, and just overall witnessing a once beautiful land swallowed up in flames. In Avatar The Way of Water, they play this piece of music when Shamu gets killed. Yeah. But let's back up a bit, because I'm being a bit unfair, and to give Way of Water some credit, this is a much smaller scale story compared to the original film, so playing the sad time music while accompanying Brendan Fraser's death isn't going to naturally hit the same way that blowing up an entire ecosystem in the original Avatar is. But I think in spite of that, even if this whaling scene was equally as large scale as the destruction of Home Tree in the first Avatar, it just doesn't make the same emotional impact whatsoever, and that's purely because in Way of Water, there was barely, if any, set up to either the death of this fucking whale, what exactly makes this whale so valuable, or why anyone should even give a shit other than it's a whale. You see, the reason why the destruction of Home Tree and the music accompanying it is so emotionally powerful is because throughout the second act, both Jake and us, the audience, explore this massive environment that Neytiri and her people call home. We see why the Na'vi love this place so much and why they'll fiercely protect it no matter the cost. And it's what makes that scene where Korich and his team blowing it to smithereens so emotionally gut-wrenching. We spent so much time with this area, and to see it all go up in flames naturally makes us emotionally distraught by what's happening. Plus, the film mentions very early in the beginning that the reason why they want to chop this thick tree down is because it's on top of a massive amount of unobtainium, so it gives us context as to why they so badly want to pull a Onceler. All of this is essential information that gives us an emotional reason for us to feel what the movie wants us to feel, and that's just completely lacking in this scene where the Australians kill Brendan Fraser. It's clear that Cameron wanted to replicate the destruction of Home Tree moment from the first film, but it just doesn't work in Way of Water because it is lacking the emotional weight or attachment that we need for us to even give a shit in the first place. And a big reason as to why the emotional drive to care is just lacking in this moment is because this moment, unlike the destruction of Home Tree, wasn't properly set up. The whales don't fucking show up until at least an hour into the movie, and even then we are given no explanation as to what they are, what exactly their deal is, or why we should give a fuck other than that they're whales. I thought what was going to happen is that we learn more about these whales through the perspective of Loak as he ends up befriending the outcast whale, and I guess it sort of does that, but again, like I mentioned before, all of this potential world building is just pushed aside to show more cool water shit, and so we don't really ever get to know why the Na'vi care so much about these fucking space whales until literally 2 hours into the movie, where Kate Winslet's character shares with Jake's family, and to an extent us, about how she has a sort of sisterly spiritual bond with the mother whale, and how they connect over their pregnancies, their love of music, poetry, etc. It's a sweet moment that should have been further explored, but it just wasn't. It, like everything else in this fucking movie, is sidestepped so that we can get to the scene where Korich and Outback Steakhouse hunt it down and shoot the shit out of it with harpoons. But again, we needed more time with this whale. We needed more time to emotionally attach ourselves to these whales because they're kind of just thrust into the movie. And that's why when Kate Winslet finds the mother whale's body and screams and cries about its death and how she deserves retribution for the whale's death, I just don't feel the emotions that Cameron wants me to feel in this moment for all the reasons I just mentioned. I did like how the film doesn't reveal why the Australians are hunting these whales until after they've killed it, and they explain to Spider that the reason why they hunt them is to squeeze out its brain cum that keeps people immortal, and that the rest of the whale is just fucking thrown out and left to rot in the ocean. It's a particularly powerful scene, but again, it would have affected me even more if I just had an emotional reason to give a fuck in the first place. It's clear that Cameron put an effort to make this scene as emotionally powerful as the Home Tree destruction scene, and while on paper you could argue that he accomplished this goal, it's just not giving me that emotional oomph that made me ultimately care.
In conclusion,
So yeah, to wrap everything up, these 3 points are why I think Avatar is the superior film to Avatar The Way of Water. I have plenty of other points that goes even deeper as to why I enjoyed the first Avatar over the sequel, but they're pretty minor compared to these 3 main points, so if you're interested in hearing my deeper thoughts about this film, I recommend you check out my podcast, Far Off Films Podcast. Overall, I know that I'm probably in the minority with this opinion, as this film is pretty well received by both critics and audiences, but hopefully I've given a pretty reasonable argument as to why I believe what I believe. And to be fair, as much as I was harping on Way of Water for its flaws, I did enjoy the movie overall. If you follow me on Letterboxd, you'll know that I gave the film a positive score, and despite my issues, I actually do want to see the movie again. I want to re-experience that fun I had the first time I saw it, and I'm super excited to see where this franchise will go next. But I think in spite of my enjoyment, it's important to note why the film failed in several areas, and where I think the next couple of films need to improve upon in the next upcoming sequels. Because as much as I hate to admit it, I'm a fan of this franchise, and so I want to see more of what the world of Pandora has to offer, but I think that no matter what Cameron does with this franchise, he should always be mindful of what made the first film successful, but still try to add new twists to those special moments and turn them into something even better, instead of just trying to do the same shit. Because for me, some of the biggest detractors of Way of Water was those moments where it tried to do the first film again, but not exactly succeeding as they thought they were. That's not to say they can't be parallels for sure, but like any good sequel, the future Avatar movie should really try to get super creative and out there and really go for something bold and ambitious. And besides, as much as Cameron attempted to recapture the magic of the first Avatar's ending by having the film end in the same way with Jake Sully opening his eyes before cutting to credits, you just can't beat the iconic ending of the first Avatar, because that moment was just pure fucking perfection.